Mike Wilson here, the host of the Stutter with Confidence podcast. And I'm very honored today to be joined by one of my favorite people in the stuttering world, Kristin Chmela. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you for having me. I love talking with you, Michael.
Great to have you. And we've met over Zoom to have this podcast chat. This is the third time, and the first two times we just got to talking and had a great chat and never even got to recording. So it's good to do this for other people to see the conversation as well. So if you would just tell people, the few people out there that don't know about you, just tell people where you live and what you do.
Sure. So I'm Kristin Chmela, and I live in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. I have a clinic that's very specialized in stuttering and other fluency disorders called the Chmela Fluency Center. And I also am co-founder, co-director of Camp Shoutout, which is a week-long camp for school-age children and teens who are persisting in stuttering, as well as a training opportunity that's hands-on learning for graduate students and speech-language pathologists.
Sounds good.
And I'm also a grandmother. I'm a grandmother and a mother of two grown daughters. So
nice. Got good things happening on the professional and the personal side. And you're also a person who stutters.
Yes.
Which
I like to say that I grew up as a person who stutters and stuttered well into my adulthood, and still stutter sometimes. I don't really live in the mind of it anymore, but I may have a moment where I'm noticing that I'm thinking about my speech. Not very often. Boy, the brain is powerful, isn't it?
It really is. I like to call that, I like to personify it because for me, I like to think of my speaking as a sport because that made it a lot more fun. You're not like, oh yeah, I got this stutter and I really need to be working on things, so I don't stutter, that whole thing. Like, no, it's a glorious sport. It's a fun sport. And so if it's a sport, then there's an opponent. Every sport has an opponent, so I like to call it the Stuttering Wolf. And that feeling you're talking about, every once in a while, as I call it, the Stuttering Wolf shows up and sort of whispers in my ear, Mike, you might be about to not be able to say this word, or that I call it an urge to hold back.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. It's I hate to use the word mysterious, but it is. Why does he show up one day and not the, 9 days before, that sort of thing? And, do you think that might be linked with our sort of thorough, most of it? Well, did you have a thorough dislike of your stuttering when you were a kid?
Oh, gosh. I love how you said that. Thorough dislike. I think I stopped crying about stuttering when I was in my early 40s, if you want to know the truth. I had so much shame about it. And I really was so aware of other people, their reactions, my father used to say I had an eagle eye. But I was so aware of the change in eye gaze and of course there was a lot of bullying too that went on. So I definitely could relate to that comment that you said. And lots of times I love the Stuttering Wolf. Lots of times I talk about it as a dog, and either you walk this dog or it walks you. And at the end of the day, that becomes the game, right? Hugo Gregory, my mentor, used to talk about the game of wanting to try something, just like a sport, just like you said. I love that analogy. And once you begin to realize that you can play with actions and you can feel something different and you can start thinking about your stuttering differently, it all changes.
Totally. And, just like a real sport, would you ever want to play a sport where the opponent forgot about the game and never showed up, right? That'd be the most boring sport in history if the opponent never showed up. So what about reversing this feeling that we, almost all of us had when we were younger, just like, oh, I got a presentation today. I hope to God the wolf, I didn't call it the wolf in those days, but I hope to God my stutter forget, just leaves me alone. Just leave me alone, please. Don't show up for the game. But when we're thinking of it as a sport, it's like, no, you want your opponent. Yeah, bring it on. I got a
Right.
presentation today. Bring your A game. I'll bring my A game. If I, right. And if I stutter, not the end of civilization, right? Just like that's another analogy with sports. No athlete could ever reach their potential so long as they're terrified of making a mistake, right? You can't play,
I like that. If you're
right?
terrified of making a mistake, you're not present. You're not in it. I don't know if you've ever heard of Brian Cain, but he writes, he's a very well-known sports psychologist and coach on the mental part of the game. But he talks a lot about the idea in baseball that you don't practice to win. You don't practice to win, you practice to prepare. You prepare so that when you're in the middle of the real game, you're able to call upon things with a trust and a presence that is different than trying so hard to win. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good stuff. And not being focused, hyper focused on the outcome, but just focused on the process and
The
focus
evolution. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I
Getting
have to
better.
tell you one thing about wolves. You probably already know this, but I read once that the leader of the pack of wolves stands in the back and all the wolves are before him, not the other way around. And I love that because he stands in the back making sure everything is accounted for versus being in the front and having no idea what's going on behind him. Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Like
That really struck me when you said wolves. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
well, and your similar analogy with dogs, learn to either walk the dog or sort of let the stray dog roam in the woods out back, wondering when he's going to jump out and get us.
Or it walks you, meaning the dog is pulling you. You are not in control of that dog.
Right.
Yeah. I don't like the word control, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. The wolf is calling the shots, or the dog in this case is calling the shots. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting, this analogy between wolves and dogs, from what I understand, from what my understanding of what science understands, is that, dogs are evolved from wolves, and that probably at some point, well, we know dogs weren't always domesticated, right? Because nothing has always been domesticated, but they think apparently that slowly but surely over many generations, wolves and humans got, some wolves started hanging around the human settlements, probably getting a little, sort of scraps from the humans' table, that sort of thing. Over time, they got sort of a little more friendly with us. We got a little more friendly with them. And eventually they were domesticated, and they're not wolves anymore, they're dogs. But that's
cool.
So trying to domesticate the wild, scary wolf into, something that we can walk. Not, I don't.
Never thought about it that way, but yeah. And I'm thinking about the idea that we can coexist. We can live with dogs. And dogs can be challenging and they can be so wonderful. Mm-hmm.
Totally. And that idea that that we don't have to just sort of live in fear of when the wolf is going to jump out from the woods, but we can actually, I like to call it sometimes wolf hunting. We can go find him, go see where, rather than like, not daring to look the wolf in the eye and go to where he is, actually, hunting him. And that's an offensive mentality, right? As opposed to just playing defense all the time, wondering when he's going to get us.
It's called going forward. There's something very powerful that happens in the brain when we keep going forward.
Totally. And from what I understand, physiologically, fear and excitement, the same process is happening in our body, from what I understand. But in the one case, well, it largely depends on how we look at it. So that thing that's so scary could very easily be turned into something that excites us, right? Either way, it's going to energize us in some capacity, maybe in a sort of dark way or a positive way.
Mhm.
And I guess it makes sense, right? Our ancestors are walking, and the lion or the tiger jumps out of the woods. You're scared, I'm sure, real scared, but you're sure as heck not bored, right? It's excitement and fear do go hand in hand in a lot of ways. But if we change the way we look at it, it can go from just something that with mortal dread, which we've all felt in our youth when it comes to stuttering, or it can be like, all right, let's do this. And again, even if I stutter, and the beauty of this, this is that with a real wolf, he can kill you. He can make you bleed. He can, ruin your life. Stuttering blocks. Nobody's ever gone to jail for stuttering, as far as I know. Nobody's ever died from stuttering, as far as I know, although maybe cumulative stress over the course of a lifetime might shorten the life. But it's not illegal to stutter, and it's not going to have to go to the hospital for it. So it's actually those fears are, they're obviously social fears, and they're real. And the worst fear I've ever felt was, that sort of first day of 8th grade when the teacher says, okay, we're going to go around, everybody say your name and say what
I would just leave.
I
I
hear
just
you.
left.
I hear you. So one person I know said that when he had to give a presentation in high school, he would, and I'm a dentist, so this sort of double would resonate with me, but he would get a big bucket of ice and just eat the whole bucket of ice and break his teeth so that he'd have to go to the dentist so that he wouldn't have to go give the presentation.
Wow.
He always had dental problems, real dental problems, because he,
going back to what you said, it's not, we can't just talk ourselves out of this. It's hard work, and it involves learning. I believe you're talking about the fear response, the fight or flight or freeze response in the brain. It's about learning something about neuroscience, and it's also about becoming aware, building awareness of your physical body and what it feels like, or what you're thinking, or how you name those emotions, building awareness over time so that you can begin working with your body's response. I know you were at the mindfulness lecture I gave, and that's one of the key ways that we build this awareness is to practice mindfulness.
which is very much, dovetails with sports also, right? And why these sports psychology coaches almost always, maybe they're not doing like, Buddhist style mindfulness meditation, but their mindfulness is a part of it for sure. And they almost all use some sort of breathing as well, and you see this, for example, I've been watching the NBA playoffs. Almost all of them, before they shoot a free throw, you see them go, and then they shoot their free throw. I'm sure they've probably been taught to do that.
Well,
right.
Remember that nobody, especially now with the way that mindfulness is being talked about, nobody has to practice a certain religion to practice mindfulness exercises. We don't have to go to India and sit in an ashram and wake up at 3 a.m. and start meditating. These practices are being brought into every corner of our world right now. To businesses, to corporations, to schools, to therapy, because the research is showing how effective they are in altering our brain's response to something. So in creating a space between what's happening and how we react. And it's pretty exciting stuff.
I totally agree. And I really think this is here to stay. I don't think it's a fad. I think it's here to stay. And, finally medicine, I would say medicine and science in the last, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 years, but it's accelerating right in the last seemingly 10 to 15 years is sort of catching up to some of these ancient traditions like yoga, like meditation, when it comes to mindfulness, because well, I think a part of it is a lot of these conditions, a lot of psychological conditions, for example, which is not, what's happening with stuttering, although it can, create psychological challenges,
Right.
the shame and all that. But, things like PTSD and addiction and, depression. From what I understand, the evidence is starting to pile up that, well, and first of all, a lot of those things have been very resistant to traditional medicine, right? To medication, to, sitting on the shrink's couch for 1 hour a week, that sort of thing. Not to say that those things can't be valuable, because they can be, but wouldn't it be nice, and isn't it nice to find an approach that you can call on regularly without, medication or necessarily, having to run to somebody else to, set your mind straight, sort of thing.
Well, I think that in just talking about mindfulness, it can be another piece of an individual person's management plan when they're coping with a problem. And mindfulness is not only for individuals that have challenges, it's for everyone. And it creates an opportunity for individuals to bring their best selves forward. And it helps with regulation, with emotional regulation. And we know that research shows that young children who stutter may have difficulty with regulation.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did. I think it was late. In my case, there was a hypersensitivity, certainly as a kid, to what others thought. And whether it was
normal. Yeah. Isn't it normal for all of us to fear the judgment of others, regardless of the presenting problem?
It certainly is. And I mean, we're I think the most social of animals on the planet, as far as I know. And I mean, in history, well, we're probably hardwired to need to care what the group thinks about us, because if you think about most of our ancestors until, recent centuries, or even not that long ago, I don't know, not that long ago, if your tribe, if you were too different, if you weren't accepted by your tribe and they cast you out, you're dead, because the neighboring tribe is probably the enemy of your tribe, because you're battling over scarce resources, and the animals aren't your friends. So you're probably dead if you get cast out. So you really got to be dialed into what other people think, making sure you're within the norm, you're within the acceptable limits, because otherwise you might die. Right. And from what I understand, we're still operating with our physical machinery from 100,000 years ago, maybe millions of years ago.
The lizard brain, the primitive brain, the purpose was survival, right?
Yeah. I mean, the lizard brain probably,
and it was satisfaction, and then it became connection. So maybe when we think about it, humans communicating, the point is connection. So if we think about stuttering and why it is so difficult for so many individuals who stutter as they grow up and as they become adults, and they have to deal with the negative reactions of listeners and what that does, even momentarily, to the connection with another person. It makes sense. It makes sense. The whole point of communication is connection.
And the whole point of talking is, communication and connection, right?
To share what your perceptions are, that's how somebody knows you, right? In part. Yeah. One of the things that we do, Mike, at Camp Shoutout, it's become very clear to me over a long time of trying to help children with their communication while we're at this camp, while we're really doing camp things. We don't do camp and then do speech. It's all part of it, is that we're helping children by guiding them to have positive experiences communicating, whatever that means. There's so many variables involved, but that's really what we're trying to do. And I believe that that builds resilience in these children.
Is it like proving to themselves that, I can communicate. I can absolutely communicate. I can connect with other people. I mean, that's obviously a safe environment around a lot of other kids that stutter and folks that understand it. But you got to start somewhere, right? I mean,
right. And some of these kids are, every child, every person who stutters has their own experience. And what we try to do with the professionals is help them understand that children are going to come forward and do things. They have a general community of reinforcement there. 100 people saying, that was so assertive of you, and getting up there. And we have ways of guiding their practice of something to help them feel support. And the end goal is never to not stutter. We don't talk about stuttering that much. We talk about ways we can become stronger as communicators, because there are multiple ways we can become stronger. And I do think the brain needs these positive experiences associated with communication. And children learn how to set themselves up. They learn how to go back to school and say, oh, I have a presentation. This is what I'm going to do. And we've heard this from parents. They go to the teacher, they practice, they share that they stutter. So it's a way to help support these positive experiences.
That's huge. And that's such a different experience than I had in childhood with my stuttering, and probably than you had, and that 99+% of kids that stutter have, who don't get to go to a camp, like this, because for most of us, for most kids, you're just reacting as best you can, which is basically you felt some social pain and rejection at some point, usually once you get to a certain age, obviously depending on the kid, but maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, whenever that first experience is for a kid, when they learn to, there's something different about me, and this is a big problem in my life. And then they just sort of hang on for dear life the rest of their childhood. I mean, that's what I did, just trying to hide it like the plague, and
some children, other children have a completely different approach and trajectory around it. And that's why it's so important to keep talking about different people's experiences. Sometimes when people say, well, people who stutter such and such, the first thing I say is, well, some people. And I can say that knowing my own experience, and then working for 35 years with hundreds of children who stutter, and adults, but not as many as the children. Yeah.
And so what, So how rare is that you encounter a child, say a 12-year-old that stutters, and I know I wasn't always forthcoming with my speech therapist at that age. I didn't want to talk about how bad I felt about it.
Sure, and
Um,
that's normal. Yeah.
right, right. So they may have never, unless they really probed for it, which very few were for me. It was always just, learning the easy onset. Okay, let's practice your D words, Michael. Largely, you know,
That's not the kind of therapy we do.
yeah.
Just so you know.
And that's, yes, that's,
We know now that counseling plays a tremendous role in the therapeutic process. And there are many ways we can all modify communicative behavior, and we can learn to deal with these thoughts and feelings. And sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it's really hard. Mhm. How rare is it that we have a child that seems to be feeling positive about communicating and that continues talking? Is that your question?
yeah, that if it comes to you for therapy, say, for the first time when they're of an age, I don't know, 10 or older, when the iceberg oftentimes would have already started to form for kids, and they just seem to not have that iceberg at all. They just don't sort of care. I'm just gonna talk and stutter.
Well, I would not say that that's rare. What I would say is that many factors contribute to that, especially the child's temperament, the child's ability to attend. So if a child has a diagnosis of ADHD, sometimes we see children who are not reading those social cues in the same way, and it almost protects them a little bit from that. It depends on the child's family and the child's environment. So the point is, every time the horse leaves the gate, it's a new race. So I have no idea what I'm dealing with. And it's taking the time to understand the person and the family and the environment and figure out what is it that they want. They usually come to therapy because something isn't going well, and how can we help you make something go better? And that could mean a million different things. Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Understood. And when it's at camp, well, what percentage of the kids that come to Camp Shoutout are kids that you're already working with
Oh,
for therapy?
I would say that we have kids that come from all over the world. We probably have, we typically have 60 campers. I would say maybe we have 10% of those campers, maybe a few more, that are coming from the Camella Fluency Center. We have other campers that have never had therapy. We have campers that have worked with other specialists, and they're coming in part for an opportunity to be with other kids who stutter. So we know that this is good. Having this community support is partly how we build resiliency, right? So that's really important. We have some kids that come to camp and don't end up coming back to therapy, and they check in at camp and they continue to manage things on their own. So there are multiple ways that it's looked at, yeah, or that it occurs, yeah. Mhm.
Gotcha. And at camp, I assume, well, because it's not one-on-one therapy for the most part at camp, right? It's more of like the groups doing the same sort of things.
Well, so we have two tracks for campers. We have a general camp program and we have a leader in training program. And the leader in training program, a camper can do when they get into high school, and it involves heightened, sort of more sophisticated activities around team building, physical challenges. For instance, if a child does not swim and does not want to go in the water, they may not do the leader in training program. It also involves things like creating skits in the evening and presenting those for the camp. The general camp has a schedule, and there are times when the campers meet in smaller teams. So we may have a facilitator who is a person that I've got 11 people on my leadership team from all over the country that do a lot of work in fluency. And then some trainees, so a couple speech therapists, a grad student, and then maybe 4 to 6 campers. So they get to know each other very well. So they have that connection with a smaller group. And then they are also working on various communicative challenges with that group throughout the week at different times of the day. Then we have groups where we talk about things. We talk about challenges and about concepts related to helping ourselves accept stuttering and sharing feelings about it, and at the same time talking about the importance of evolving. So it's all mixed in, and there's a lot that goes on at the lunch table. We eat all of our meals together. The greatest thing in the world is hanging out with kids in the morning and they're still in their pajama pants and we're sitting there. It's so real. And at the same time, we're modeling things, or we're saying, hey, thanks for looking at me. Thanks for finishing that block. So we're giving this like natural reinforcement, not too much, but enough that the child is actually evolving right in the middle of doing real camp things. We zip line, we rock climb, we swim, we canoe, there's multiple things that we do, and they all can be drawn back to who we are as communicators. Lots of kids take physical risks. Lots of adults take physical risks. And then we talk about it. We have what's called the evening shout out at night. And there's a big stick and there's a green zone. That's my comfort. A blue is my, maybe it's a stretch, and this was a real peak for me. And kids get up and they hold the stick and they share. And we share, and kids are talking in front of over 100 people multiple times a day. So it's, and kids also sign up. They do everything at camp. They make the announcements. They MC the final ceremony. They share, they're in a play. They share a poem and they choose a small group, a large group. So they are doing these things, but they're also running the camp. So there's this real element. We use a lot of microphones. We have a lot of relays and competition. So it's a pretty special place.
That's awesome. And, getting back to that idea of sort of learning not to hold back, right? You're afraid of doing this thing. It's out of your comfort zone. Yeah.
We talk a lot about forward, be assertive, not aggressive and not passive, but assertive. Yeah.
That's awesome. And yeah, and with a kid, I mean, you have an experience like that, and I mean, even as an adult, I've had those times. There can be turning points in our life where we sort of where we turn a corner and say, this is a much better way to live. I'm never going back.
What was your turning point?
So,
if you don't mind me asking.
Yeah. So my turning point, I would say, came in a couple of stages. Well, the sports experience growing up certainly provided a foundation, and obviously, having good parents, all that stuff is invaluable. But as far as the clear turning points, I would say it was when I was a freshman at Florida State, and I'm not sure if you knew the guy who ran the department of Florida State was a guy named Dr. Richard Ham.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
Nice. Yep. And so when my parents dropped me off at Florida State, they knew I was just totally in my shell from a speaking standpoint, which meant I was in my shell, from a social standpoint. And they stopped by and spoke with Dr. Ham and said, sort of begged and pleaded with him to please help their son somehow. And so I started with therapy with him. And for the whole first semester, he introduced no technique whatsoever, just brought me around campus. Mainly the grad assistants were the one that were actually doing it, but brought me around campus and made me ask people questions and look them in the eye when I stutter. And I fairly quickly realized, holy, you know what? People don't seem to care that much about my stutter. It's not
Wow.
the whole
That took a
world.
lot of courage. Mhm.
Well, and it took a bunch, I don't know, it took 3 or 4 solid sessions, maybe more,
Mhm.
where I wouldn't just automatically go and look away at me. Michael, look him in the eye. Michael, look him in the eye, right? My instinct, it was like gravity, force of
Of
nature.
course.
Can't face that thing I'm so afraid of. I can't look at people's reactions, but lo and behold, in time I could. And then basically I went from feeling all alone in those stuttering moments to feeling like the other person was right in there with me. Yeah, I'm the one with the stutter, but we're just two human beings looking at each other. Yep, I'm trying to get this damn word out of my mouth, but basically I stopped feeling inferior. Um, and by facing that thing I was so afraid of, which is other people's react. What are people going to think when I start stuttering like this? And I just made the decision at that point, I'm not running away from words anymore. That's a miserable way
Right.
to live.
You made a decision. I
Mm,
love how you said that.
mm.
And you had support. You had a good relationship, I'm guessing, with Richard Ham
Yes,
and with the students. Yeah.
absolutely. And I just, it sort of shattered the myth, which I now see as a myth, that everybody's going to laugh at you, that nobody's going to listen to you, that everybody's going to
Oh,
disrespect you.
sure. Those are like absolutes, right?
Yeah,
Absolutes
I
are
love it.
not necessarily true.
Yeah,
Always or never.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And I came to realize when you do that, wait a second, that 1 in 100 person who is going to be a jerk about it, they're the outlier. They're the weirdo. They're the person that should be ashamed of themselves, not me.
Especially if you keep your eyes on their face and they look away. I love to say to clients sometimes, how willing are you to keep negotiating about this? How willing are you to allow this dog to keep getting in front of you? Are you done negotiating it yet? Because once you make that decision, I made that decision too, I think in my 20s. Someone at a health club, I was taking an exercise class and they asked us to say our names and I got really stuck and the instructor started laughing and all the people started laughing. They were shocked. They were caught by surprise. Laughing is an unexpected reaction. And after the class, I went to leave and I got out of my car. I remember sitting in my car saying, you know what? This is the end of it. And I got back out of my car. I went in and found the instructor and I said, I just want you to know when I said my name, I stuttered and I have a stuttering problem. And she, of course, was so apologetic. That was the time. That was one of those decisions. And we do make them several times, don't we? Because nobody, we climb up this mountain and then I like to say we step to the side sometimes and we get a little caught in our head again. And then we have to just work it out to keep going. Yeah. Mhm.
Because the wolf isn't dead, right? He's
That's
still there
right.
whispering in our ear.
That's
Um,
right. And
and
it's okay. It's okay. Yeah.
absolutely. And if it's a sport that you enjoy, well, then it's actually good. Like, let's keep this
Yeah.
going. You know?
Is it really possible to enjoy communicating? Yes, it is. And in a way that I don't think a person who has not stuttered could understand.
I agree 100%, right? For example, just one mundane, well, this is mundane for people that don't stutter, being able to say their name. Let's say it's Starbucks, right? That's a non-event for them. It's a total non-event.
Mhm.
But for us, when you can belt out your name at Starbucks, that feels fantastic,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. And
oh,
if you stutter on your name and hold on to their face, that's fantastic too.
totally, totally.
Right?
And,
Right?
and the bottom line is you're getting the coffee that you want,
Right. Right.
what you want
Yeah.
to do, and
The
again,
contribution. Mhm.
what's
Mhm.
that?
The contribution. Yeah.
Totally. And again, the point of talking is to communicate. And in the case of ordering food, it's not necessarily that you're, uh, connecting with the person at Starbucks, although you can. Chris Constantino speaks about an example that I've experienced myself, that sometimes you can actually generate more connection with people when you stutter, because it's an interesting moment for people, right? And you're putting your vulnerability out there in some capacity by ordering the, particular kind of coffee you want, even though you're going to stutter, rather than just ordering what you can say easier. And they, especially with eye contact again, and I think a part of that, because so much, well, eye contact goes back before human speech, right? I mean, we were probably looking at each other before some caveman said, tree, oh, tree, okay. And then language started growing, right? I would assume that's how it must have happened. And so we were looking at each other long before, and eye contact means something in the animal kingdom, right? It means a lot oftentimes. And so there's all sorts of stuff that's below our, awareness level that just goes way back. And when you're looking at people, it just sends a message that you're not a sort of a wilting willow, like you've got some self-respect, and it communicates to them he's still talking, right? If you ask my name and I'm like, right? If you don't know what's going on, you're probably like, is he still talking? What's happening right now?
I love to,
Yep.
when you think about the word contact, it means to hold on with. So the idea that you're holding on to somebody's face with your eyes, and it has to be natural, right? Sometimes we look away and then we look back. But the connection, right? Thinking about that word connect, the connection is in being able to say what you want and getting it, right? So if you're not saying what you want, then you're not going to get what you want, and you have just lost the connection to yourself. Your desire is this, but you're saying this instead. You didn't connect with yourself. I'm working with a boy right now, told me has ordered Sprite every time he orders something because he can say it the easiest without stuttering. And I looked at this teenager and I said, do you like Sprite? And he said, no. So he's working on ordering root beer. And it's hard. It's hard. These are real fears. These are deep. These are significant. And it's hard. It's also possible to keep evolving for all of us.
Totally. And I think once you sort of taste that, was it root beer is what he really wants? When you start getting what you want, and then you get some feedback like, oh, my life is actually getting better.
Yeah.
That's good, positive reinforcement. And, and the thing is, the world, the non-stuttering world, one of the unique or strange things about stuttering is that everybody stutters a little bit sometimes.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
non-stuttering people, when they first see our stuttering, they initially think they know what they're seeing. They think they're seeing a non-stuttering person who's having a stuttering moment. And so they're confused. So they might get the laugh.
Sometimes. Yeah.
But when it's super, like when you're, like when it's something like that, it's more, but a lot of times in the first, second, they don't know what's going on, right?
Yeah, and that makes it so hard.
Right.
Because we have to become so confident, so grounded, right? That we have to learn to rise above the reaction and just hang on if we need to and stay present in the conversation. Most of us who stutter, or many of us, not all, are thinking about the stutter we just had or the stutter that we're about to do. We are not present and we're not connecting, and we feel it.
Yes. And And the only moment that we can ever act in is the current one. That's all, right? We can't fast forward the
That's
tape and
brilliant.
act
Yes.
tomorrow. We can't roll back the clock and change what happened before. We're always, the only moment we can act in is right now.
And that's why practicing mindfulness as one of the things you do before you get on the field every day is so powerful. It allows one to access that easier and quicker. And we have to keep evolving it. People that teach mindfulness practice it. And if they don't, they feel a difference. Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, I try to monitor my breathing all day.
Oh, you do? Okay. That
I
takes
try
a
to-
lot of thought.
What's that?
That takes a lot of thought.
Well,
What does that mean? What does that mean?
Well,
Monitor.
that means basically know whether I'm on the inhale or whether I'm on the exhale or whether I'm pausing after I've, exhaled.
So you try to notice. You try to notice that you're breathing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Aware
Because
of it.
I mean, if we're breathing, we're alive, right?
Right. I mean, we have to breathe all day anyway.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
We're alive. One of the things that we don't do in therapy is talk about taking a deep breath when you're speaking. In fact, I tell clients, your brain has something called the autonomic nervous system, and it's in charge of your breathing, and it knows exactly what it's doing. It's none of your business. Unless when you're talking, you start running out of breath, but you're still trying to push words out like that, then you might be aware of that. And there is something you might do to help. So we talk about knowing how to take the most efficient breath in the most effective way, or the most effective breath in the most efficient manner for your physiology. And I think about breath a lot during the day. And I try to move my breath into my belly, into that lower diaphragm. Just thinking about breath makes us more aware. And whenever we think about our breath, we're in the present moment.
Totally.
We're right there. Yeah.
And I think of the breath as kind of the bridge between the mind and the body, right? It sits in the center there.
Your breath is the connector between your mind and your body. And I'm saying this, Mike, I've done 400 hours of yoga mindfulness training. So I'm speaking now, not from my speech pathology wheelhouse, but from my yoga mindfulness wheelhouse. Yeah.
And it's really helped me with my focus as well. Because on the one hand, yes, it would take a lot of mental energy to pay attention to your breathing all day. On the other hand, because it gets you more in the present moment, I feel like it makes me more focused and I'm more aware of things around me. I'm more aware of, I'm a better listener, for example. Now, at first, obviously, it was very hard to do both, to pay attention to what's going on with my breathing, and to, pay attention to other things. But over time, as that mindfulness came, and it's helped me in sports. For example, with basketball, there are little things that I now notice, even though I'm 44, so I'm probably at the tail end.
We never stop growing as observers, ever. I believe that.
Totally. And that just sort of neutrally paying attention to what's happening, right? Not judging it. Oh, that was bad. That was good. That was good. That was bad. Just being aware of it. Okay, that's what happened.
I like how you said that. So instead of evaluating, you're observing. There's a difference in the brain between what we call the narrative focus, being caught up in the story of it as it's happening, and whether it's good or bad or right or wrong, right? Versus the experiential focus, which is another part of the brain, which is accessing that present moment, just being aware. And you're right, mindfulness trains us to be aware within our own physical body, our own thoughts, and our own emotions, and then to create awareness without. And we can see how in every person's life this is relevant, no matter who they are or what they do. I
Absolutely.
hate to end our conversation because we could talk for a really long time.
We could for sure. And we have, and I'm sure we'll again in the future, but I've thoroughly enjoyed the chat. Kristin, any final thoughts or things that we didn't get to that you'd like to mention?
Well, I think we'll just keep the conversation going.
Sounds good. Sounds like a plan. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I did too.
It's always a pleasure, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.